"Excuse me, you cannot be in here. Staff entrance is that way. Move along." The words cut through the marble lobby of the Grande Royale Hotel like a blade. Madison Cooper snapped her fingers twice, the sound echoing off the gold-leafed ceiling, as if she were summoning a disobedient dog. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, her navy blazer pressed to perfection, and her voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been questioned. She stepped directly into the path of a tall black man in an impeccable Armani suit, her body language screaming superiority and disdain. The man paused, adjusting his leather briefcase with hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, though Madison Cooper had absolutely no idea who she was really talking to. "I don't know how you got past security." Madison continued, her manicured finger jabbing toward a side door marked "Staff Only." "But this is a 5-star establishment. Guests are complaining about the situation." The dozen white business travelers in the lobby stopped mid-conversation. Phones lifted. Whispers started. Madison's performance was deliberate humiliation as public spectacle. What she didn't know was that she was about to make the most expensive mistake of her career. The man she was dismissing so casually was Marcus Washington, 42-year-old chairman and CEO of Washington Enterprises. His net worth, $2.8 billion. The partnership his company had with this hotel, $10.2 million annually renewable every 5 years. And today was renewal day. Madison Cooper had no idea she was about to destroy her hotel's most valuable relationship with nothing more than her assumptions about what a billionaire CEO should look like. But Marcus Washington, he knew exactly what was happening, and he was about to teach her the most expensive lesson in hospitality history. Let me tell you about Marcus Washington, because his story makes what happens next even more powerful. Born in Detroit in 1982, Marcus learned about discrimination before he could even spell the word. His mother died when he was 6. His father vanished before his first birthday, and he spent his childhood bouncing between foster homes and his grandmother's cramped apartment. At 8 years old, he was followed around stores by security guards. At 12, he was told he didn't belong in the library, where he spent every afternoon teaching himself about business and finance. By 14, Marcus was selling refurbished electronics from his grandmother's garage. By 18, he'd earned a full scholarship to Harvard Business School. By 25, he'd founded Washington Enterprises with a $50,000 loan and an unshakable belief that excellence speaks louder than prejudice. 18 years later, Marcus Washington had built an empire. Washington Enterprises owned technology companies, real estate portfolios, and hospitality partnerships across 3 continents. His personal wealth had reached $2.8 billion, making him one of the youngest black billionaires in American history. But more than the money, Marcus had something precious, the power to demand respect, not just hope for it. On this particular Tuesday afternoon in October 2024, Marcus stood in the lobby of the Grande Royale Hotel, wearing a charcoal Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His Patek Philippe watch caught the light as he checked the time. 1:45 p.m. 75 minutes until the most important board meeting of the quarter. In his Louis Vuitton briefcase, monogrammed with a subtle MW in gold, lay documents that would renew Washington Enterprises' partnership with Atlas Hospitality Group, the parent company of Grande Royale. The partnership was worth $10.2 million annually and had made Grande Royale one of the most profitable hotels in their chain. Marcus had personally chosen this hotel for today's ceremony because of its reputation for excellence. He was about to learn that reputation and reality don't always align. Now, let me tell you about Madison Cooper, because understanding her makes this story even more complex. At 35, Madison had clawed her way up from assistant manager to general manager, through sheer determination and what she called maintaining standards. She'd grown up in suburban Connecticut, the daughter of a bank manager and a real estate agent. To Madison, success meant order, control, and keeping the right kind of people happy. Madison's blonde hair was always perfect, her makeup always flawless, her smile always practiced. She'd spent 12 years in hospitality, moving from property to property, building a reputation as someone who knew how to handle difficult situations. What Madison didn't realize was that her idea of difficult situations often involved making assumptions about people based on nothing more than the color of their skin. She genuinely believed she was protecting her hotel's reputation. In her mind, she was the guardian of Grande Royale's 5-star status, the person who ensured that only the right people felt comfortable in her establishment. Madison had never examined where these beliefs came from or questioned whether her definition of right was actually wrong. Standing across from each other in that marble lobby, Marcus and Madison represented two completely different worlds about to collide. Marcus carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned his place at every table he'd ever sat at. Madison carried the nervous energy of someone who'd never had her authority questioned and didn't know what would happen if it was. The other players in our story were already in position, though none of them knew they were about to become witnesses to hospitality history. Elena Rodriguez, 26 years old, stood behind the concierge desk with her phone in her pocket. Elena had started live streaming social justice moments after witnessing too many incidents that went undocumented and unpunished. She had a following of activists and allies who trusted her to shine light in dark corners. Robert Bob Johnson, 68 years old, sat in the lobby's leather armchair reading the Wall Street Journal. Bob had marched with Dr. King, been arrested for sitting at whites-only lunch counters, and spent 50 years fighting for civil rights. His trained eye could spot discrimination from across a crowded room. James Mitchell, the 32-year-old assistant manager, hovered nervously near the reception desk. James had excellent instincts about people and terrible instincts about confronting his boss. He sensed something was wrong, but didn't have the courage to intervene. Derek Thompson, the 40-year-old security guard, stood by the elevators. Derek's military background had taught him to follow orders, but his conscience was about to be put to the test. And somewhere upstairs, Victoria Sterling, the 50-year-old regional director, was enjoying a peaceful lunch, completely unaware that her phone was about to explode with notifications that would change her career forever. All the pieces were in place. The stage was set, and Marcus Washington was about to walk into the most expensive discrimination incident in hospitality history. Marcus pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Grande Royale Hotel, and the first thing that struck him was the opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across marble floors, polished to mirror perfection. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, their scent mixing with the subtle aroma of expensive cologne and old money. This was exactly the kind of establishment that should appreciate a $10.2 million partnership. He glanced at his Patek Philippe. 1:45 p.m. Plenty of time to check in with his assistant Timothy, review the final contract details, and mentally prepare for what should have been a simple renewal ceremony. Marcus had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. Washington Enterprises had been growing rapidly, and he was ready to discuss expanding their partnership with Atlas Hospitality Group. Madison Cooper spotted him the moment he crossed the threshold. From behind the reception desk, she watched this tall black man in an expensive suit survey her lobby like he owned the place. Something about his confidence irritated her immediately. She'd seen this type before. People who dressed above their station, trying to intimidate their way into spaces where they didn't belong. Well, not on her watch. Madison had built her reputation on maintaining what she called appropriate standards. In her 12 years of hospitality management, she'd developed a sixth sense about people who might cause problems. and everything about this man screamed potential trouble. She stepped out from behind the desk, her heels clicking authoritatively across the marble. Her navy blazer was buttoned precisely, her blonde hair pulled back without a strand out of place. Madison Cooper looked like the picture of professional competence, which made what happened next even more shocking. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying across the lobby with practiced authority. "You cannot be in here. Staff entrance is that way. Move along." She snapped her fingers twice, the sound sharp and dismissive. The gesture was deliberate, designed to humiliate, to establish dominance, to make it clear that she was in charge and he was not welcome. Marcus stopped walking. For just a moment, time seemed frozen. He'd experienced moments like this before. The assumptions, the dismissals, the casual cruelty of people who looked at his skin color and saw limitation instead of achievement. But it had been years since anyone had been quite this bold about it. He turned slowly to face Madison, his expression calm, but his mind racing. This woman had no idea who she was talking to, and Marcus found himself curious about how far she would push this before reality crashed down around her. "Good afternoon, Marcus," replied his voice, steady as granite. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here for a meeting in the presidential suite." Madison's laugh was sharp and theatrical, designed to attract attention from the other guests. "A meeting." She turned slightly to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "Did everyone hear that? He thinks he's here for a meeting in the presidential suite." The lobby's other occupants, business travelers, hotel guests, staff members, began to take notice. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Phones appeared discreetly, though none of them started recording yet. Madison was creating a scene, and she seemed to relish the audience. Sir Madison continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is the Grande Royale Hotel. Our presidential suite is reserved for executives and VIPs only. Perhaps you're looking for a different establishment." Marcus adjusted his briefcase and checked his watch again. 1:47 p.m. "I understand your caution," he replied evenly. "That's exactly why I'm here. I am an executive, and this meeting was scheduled months ago." Madison's eyes narrowed. She'd been doing this for 12 years, and she knew how to read people. This man was too calm, too confident, too comfortable in his expensive suit. In her experience, people who didn't belong got nervous when challenged. They stammered, made excuses, backed down. This man was doing none of those things, which only made her more suspicious. Executive Madison's voice rose slightly. "Of what company exactly?" "Washington Enterprises," Marcus replied simply. Madison had never heard of Washington Enterprises. In her mind, that proved her point. Real companies, important companies, were names she would recognize. This was obviously some kind of scam. "I handle all major corporate bookings for this hotel," Madison announced loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "I can assure you that no such meeting is scheduled. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Behind the concierge desk, Elena Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. She'd seen this movie before, and she knew how it ended. A successful black professional would be humiliated, escorted out, and the incident would be forgotten by everyone except the victim. Unless someone did something about it. Elena quietly pulled out her phone and opened Instagram Live. In his leather armchair, Bob Johnson lowered his Wall Street Journal. At 68, Bob had witnessed enough discrimination to recognize it instantly. The finger snapping, the raised voice, the public humiliation. These were tactics designed to dehumanize, to make a human being feel small and unwelcome. Bob's jaw tightened as memories of lunch counters and bus boycotts flooded back. Near the reception desk, James Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. Something about this entire situation felt wrong. The black gentleman was well-dressed, articulate, and completely calm. Madison was being more aggressive than usual, and James could sense the other guests' discomfort. But Madison was his boss, and James had learned not to question her methods. By the elevators, Derek Thompson touched his radio. He'd been called to handle situations before, but this felt different. The man Madison was confronting didn't look like he was causing any trouble. If anything, he looked like the kind of guest Derek was supposed to protect, not remove. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The movement was casual, but Madison tensed as if he'd drawn a weapon. "Sir, please keep your hands visible," she said sharply. Marcus paused his phone halfway out of his pocket. For a moment, the absurdity of the situation hit him. Here he was in a hotel his company partially owned, being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing while black. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so familiar. "I'm checking my phone," Marcus said quietly. "My assistant sent a message about the meeting setup." "I don't care what your assistant allegedly sent," Madison replied. "You need to leave, now." Marcus looked around the lobby at the faces watching this confrontation unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few openly hostile. He saw Elena behind the concierge desk, her phone angled toward the scene. He saw Bob Johnson gripping his newspaper, his knuckles white with suppressed anger. He saw James Mitchell, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And Marcus Washington made a decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving, instead of arguing, instead of calling his lawyer or demanding to speak to management, Marcus decided to let Madison Cooper dig her own grave. Because sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't immediate retaliation. It's giving people enough rope to hang themselves with. "You know what," Marcus said with a slight smile. "You're absolutely right to be cautious. Security is very important." Madison blinked, surprised by his response. She'd been expecting anger arguments or retreat. Calm agreement was not in her playbook. "I appreciate your diligence," Marcus continued. "Why don't you call your management? I'm sure they can sort this out quickly." And that's when Madison Cooper made the first of many mistakes that would cost her hotel $10.2 million. "I don't need to call anyone," she said with supreme confidence. "I am the management." Madison's declaration that she was the management hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything in its path. She stood straighter, chin lifted, completely confident in her authority, and completely unaware that she was about to become the main character in a cautionary tale about the price of prejudice. Marcus nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "I see. Well then, Ms. Cooper." Madison Cooper, General Manager. She said it like the title was a crown, like those two words should command instant respect and obedience. "Ms. Cooper," Marcus repeated, his tone still remarkably calm. "In that case, perhaps you could help me understand your hotel's policy on guest verification. Do you typically require all guests to prove their right to be in your lobby?" The question was a trap, though. Madison was too blinded by her own assumptions to see it. Around them, the lobby had grown quieter as more people tuned into the confrontation. Business travelers paused their phone calls. Hotel staff found reasons to linger nearby. The energy in the room was shifting from curiosity to tension. "We verify guests when necessary," Madison replied curtly, "when someone's presence raises questions about hotel security." "I see. And what about my presence raises security questions?" It was a masterful move. Marcus wasn't getting angry, wasn't shouting, wasn't giving Madison any excuse to call him aggressive or threatening. Instead, he was asking her to explain her reasoning, to articulate exactly why a well-dressed businessman in an expensive suit warranted suspicion. Madison felt the trap closing around her, but she was too proud to back down. "Sir, I don't have to explain hotel security procedures to anyone. You need to leave immediately, or I'll have security escort you out." Behind the concierge desk, Elena Rodriguez quietly started her Instagram live stream. "Hey everyone," she whispered into her phone, angling the camera toward the confrontation. I'm Elena, and I'm witnessing something really disturbing at the Grande Royale Hotel in Manhattan. A well-dressed black businessman is being harassed by the manager for literally no reason except existing in this lobby. The viewer count started small, 3 viewers, then 7, then 12. But Elena's followers were social justice activists, and they knew how to signal boost when discrimination was happening in real time. Derek Thompson, the security guard, finally approached. At 40, Derek had seen enough of life to recognize injustice when it was happening in front of him. His military training said follow orders, but his conscience said something was very wrong with this picture. Ms. Cooper, Derek said carefully. Is there a problem? Madison turned to Derek with relief. Finally, someone who would back up her authority. Yes, Derek. This gentleman is refusing to leave after being asked multiple times. Derek looked at Marcus, taking in the expensive suit, the confident posture, the complete lack of threatening behavior. Sir, has there been some kind of misunderstanding? Apparently so, Marcus replied. I'm here for a business meeting, but Ms. Cooper believes I don't belong in your hotel. Derek frowned. In his experience, people who didn't belong acted nervous, defensive, or aggressive when confronted. This man was acting like someone who had every right to be exactly where he was. Ms. Cooper, Derek said slowly. Did this gentleman do something specific? That Derek Madison snapped. I don't need you to interrogate my decisions. Please escort this man out of the hotel immediately. It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Derek might have been security, but he wasn't Madison's personal enforcement officer. And he definitely wasn't comfortable being used as a weapon against someone who appeared to be doing absolutely nothing wrong. Ma'am, I need to understand what he's done that requires removal, Derek said firmly. Madison's face flushed red. Her authority was being questioned in front of a lobby full of witnesses, and she could feel control slipping away. He's trespassing. He has no business being in this hotel. Actually, a new voice interjected. I think you might want to reconsider that statement. Everyone turned to see Bob Johnson approaching from his armchair. At 68, Bob moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned that rushed words often led to regrettable actions. But his eyes blazed with the fire of someone who'd spent a lifetime fighting injustice. Sir, this doesn't concern you, Madison said quickly. Oh, but it does concern me, Bob replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades. I'm 68 years old, young lady. I marched with Dr. King. I've been arrested for sitting at whites-only lunch counters. And I recognize discrimination when I see it happening in front of me. Bob turned to address the crowd of onlookers who had gathered. Folks, pay attention to what's happening here. This gentleman, he gestured toward Marcus, walked into this hotel lobby wearing a suit that costs more than most people make in a month. He's been polite, calm, and professional. And he's being asked to leave for no reason other than the color of his skin. Madison felt panic rising in her chest. This was spiraling out of control. What should have been a simple removal of an unwanted person was turning into a civil rights demonstration. That's not what this is about, Madison protested. This is about hotel security and maintaining standards. What standards? Bob asked pointedly. The standard that says black men don't belong in nice hotels, because that's the only standard I see being enforced here. Elena's Instagram Live was gaining momentum. 23 viewers, then 45, then 67. Comments started flooding in. This is disgusting. Get their corporate number. This is 2024, not 1954. That manager is about to lose her job. James Mitchell. The assistant manager finally found his courage. He approached Madison, his face pale with worry. Madison, he whispered urgently. Maybe we should verify this gentleman's identity before James get back to work, Madison hissed. I can handle one confused individual. But James had been in hospitality long enough to recognize a disaster in the making. Madison. I really think we should. I said, handle it. Madison's voice was loud enough to echo across the marble lobby. The sharpness of her tone made several guests look up in alarm. One businessman near the elevators shook his head in disgust. This is exactly the kind of thing my wife talks about, he muttered to his companion. Systemic racism hiding in plain sight. His companion nodded grimly. My company would never do business with a place that treats people like this. Marcus listened to this exchange with growing interest. He pulled out his phone and glanced at the screen. A text from Timothy, his assistant. Sir, the board members are starting to arrive. ETA for the meeting setup completion. Marcus typed back. Slight delay. Handle the setup without me for now. Madison caught a glimpse of the phone exchange and felt a flicker of doubt. Something about Marcus's calm confidence was beginning to unnerve her. Most people, when confronted with authority, either became aggressive or backed down. Marcus was doing neither. He was acting like someone who had bigger problems to worry about than a confused hotel manager. But Madison had gone too far to back down now. Her authority had been challenged in front of hotel guests, staff members, and what appeared to be someone filming the entire confrontation. If she backed down now, she'd look weak, foolish, and completely out of control. Sir Madison said, her voice carrying across the lobby. I'm calling the police. You're trespassing on private property, and I want you arrested. The lobby went dead silent. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The police? For standing in a hotel lobby, for trespassing after being repeatedly asked to leave. Madison replied, pulling out her phone. Madison, don't. James pleaded quietly. Please, let's just... James, if you can't support management decisions, perhaps you should consider whether this is the right job for you. Madison snapped. It was a threat, and everyone heard it. James stepped back, his face burning with shame and fear for his job. Derek Thompson had heard enough. Ms. Cooper, I'm not comfortable with this situation. I think we should. Derek, you work for this hotel. Either do your job or I'll find security who will. Derek's military training had taught him to follow orders, but it had also taught him to recognize when orders were wrong. Ma'am, I need to see some evidence of wrongdoing before I can take action against someone. The evidence is that he doesn't belong here. Madison's voice was rising to near hysteria. Elena's live stream had exploded to over 150 viewers. She whispered into her phone. Guys, this is getting insane. The manager is about to call the police on a businessman for the crime of existing while black. This is exactly why we need to document these incidents. Bob Johnson stepped closer to Marcus. Son, I don't know who you are, but I want you to know that there are witnesses here. People who see what's happening and won't let it be covered up. Marcus looked at the elderly civil rights veteran with genuine respect. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. I've seen this story too many times. Bob continued, his voice carrying to the crowd. Black men and women being told they don't belong, being questioned, being made to prove their worth in spaces they have every right to occupy. Madison felt the room turning against her, but she was committed to her course now. She started dialing 911, and that's when Marcus Washington decided it was time to end this charade. Ms. Cooper, he said quietly, before you make that call, perhaps you'd like to know who you're having arrested. Madison paused, her finger hovering over the call button. Does the name Washington Enterprises mean anything to you? For the first time since this confrontation began. Madison Cooper looked genuinely uncertain. Marcus's question hung in the air, like a blade waiting to fall. Does the name Washington Enterprises mean anything to you? Madison's finger froze over her phone screen. Washington Enterprises. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't immediately place it. In her 12 years of hotel management, she'd dealt with hundreds of corporate clients, business partnerships, and conference bookings. But something about the way Marcus said it, with quiet confidence rather than desperate bluffing, made her stomach flutter with the first hint of genuine doubt. "I handle dozens of corporate accounts," Madison said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier authority. "That name might be in our system somewhere." Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated for the last time. "Might be Ms. Cooper. Washington Enterprises isn't just in your system somewhere. We're your largest corporate client." The words hit Madison like ice water. Around the lobby, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Elena's live stream viewer count jumped to over 200 as her followers sensed that something major was about to happen. The comments were coming too fast to read. Plot twist incoming. She's about to get wrecked. This man is somebody important. Manager is so fired. Bob Johnson leaned forward, his activist instincts recognizing the moment when power dynamics were about to reverse. "Young man," he said to Marcus, "am I correct in assuming that this hotel doesn't know who they're talking to?" "That appears to be the case," Marcus replied calmly. James Mitchell's face had gone pale. He knew their major corporate accounts by heart, and Washington Enterprises was indeed their biggest client. The annual contract was worth millions. If this man was actually Madison, James whispered urgently, tugging at her sleeve, "We need to talk. Right now." Madison shook him off irritably. "James, I told you to." "Madison, please." James's voice carried a desperation that made several bystanders look over. "Just for 1 minute, please." But Madison was too committed to her course to listen to warnings. She'd publicly challenged this man's right to be in her hotel. She'd threatened to have him arrested. She'd made her authority the central issue. To back down now would be to admit that she'd been completely catastrophically wrong. "I don't care what company this man claims to represent," Madison announced to the lobby. "Corporate clients go through proper channels. They don't just walk into our lobby expecting special treatment." Marcus opened his briefcase slowly, deliberately. The leather case was Italian custom-made and cost more than most people's monthly rent. Inside, Madison could see thick manila folders, official-looking documents with corporate letterheads and what appeared to be legal contracts. "Special treatment?" Marcus asked, pulling out a single document. "Is that what you call honoring a $10.2 million annual partnership?" The number hit the lobby like a thunderclap. Madison felt her knees go weak. $10.2 million. That was more than the entire annual revenue of some hotels. That was the kind of number that appeared in board meetings, corporate reports, and partnership agreements with their most valuable clients. "That's impossible," Madison said, but her voice cracked on the words. Marcus held up the document so she could see the letterhead Washington Enterprises, followed by an address in Manhattan, and a logo she now vaguely recognized from corporate communications. "Ms. Cooper, you might want to look at this before you call the police." Elena had tilted her phone to capture the document, and her viewers were going wild. "He's the CEO. $10 million. Contract. She just lost the hotel millions. This is the best plot twist ever." Madison reached for the document with trembling hands. At the top, in bold letters, Partnership Renewal Agreement, Atlas Hospitality Group and Washington Enterprises. Below that, Annual Contract Value, $10, $200, $1,000. Her eyes scanned down the page, looking for something that would prove this was fake, some sign that this was an elaborate hoax. Instead, she found her own name listed as the primary hotel contact for the Grande Royale property. The signature line at the bottom read, "Marcus D. Washington, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Washington Enterprises." Madison looked up from the document to the man she'd been trying to have arrested. Marcus Washington, the CEO of their biggest client, standing in front of her while she'd spent the last 15 minutes publicly humiliating him. "This can't be real," Madison whispered. Derek Thompson stepped closer, his security training kicking in. When situations went sideways this fast, it usually meant someone important had been seriously disrespected. "Ms. Cooper, maybe we should—" "This is real," Marcus said quietly. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Madison's phone buzzed in her hand, a notification from the hotel's social media monitoring system. The Grande Royale was being mentioned across multiple platforms. She opened the alert with shaking fingers and saw Elena's Instagram live stream, now with over 400 viewers and climbing. The comments were brutal. Boycott. Grande Royale Hotels. Racist manager about to lose $10 million deal. This is why we need to film everything. That CEO has more class than the entire staff. James Mitchell finally found his courage. "Madison, we need to call Victoria Sterling immediately. The regional director needs to know." "Shut up, James," Madison hissed, but her authority was crumbling in real time. Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID was visible to everyone nearby. Timothy, executive assistant. Marcus answered calmly, putting the call on speaker. "Mr. Washington." Timothy's voice carried clearly across the lobby. "The board members are arriving for the renewal ceremony. Should I set up the champagne service in the presidential suite?" The lobby fell silent except for the sound of Madison's world collapsing. "Timothy," Marcus replied, "there's been a slight complication. The hotel management seems to be confused about our partnership." "Sir, is there a problem with the contract signing?" Marcus looked directly at Madison. "Ms. Cooper here has been questioning whether Washington Enterprises has any business with this hotel. She was just about to call the police to have me arrested for trespassing." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then Timothy's voice, careful and professional. "Sir, should I contact the legal department regarding the termination clause?" "Not yet," Marcus replied. "Let's see if this can be resolved professionally." He ended the call and looked at Madison, who was staring at him like she'd seen a ghost. Bob Johnson stepped forward, his civil rights instincts recognizing the teachable moment. "Ms. Cooper, do you understand what just happened here?" Madison couldn't speak. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the magnitude of her mistake. She'd publicly humiliated the CEO of their biggest client. She'd threatened to have him arrested. She'd questioned his right to be in the hotel that his company helped keep profitable. Elena continued her live stream commentary. "Y'all, we just witnessed the most expensive case of racial profiling in hotel history. This manager literally tried to have her own biggest client arrested because she couldn't believe a black man could be a CEO. The viewer count had exploded past 500. The story was spreading across social media like wildfire. At Grande Royale, racism was starting to trend. A new voice cut through the tension. What exactly is happening here? Everyone turned to see Victoria Sterling approaching from the elevators. The regional director had been having a peaceful lunch upstairs when her phone started buzzing with alerts. Victoria was 50 years old, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of corporate instincts that could smell disaster from 3 floors away. Madison felt a surge of panic. Victoria Sterling was her boss's boss, the person who could end her career with a single phone call. "Victoria, I was just handling a security situation." "Security situation." Victoria's eyes swept the scene. Madison looking panicked. A well-dressed black gentleman, holding what appeared to be corporate documents. A crowd of onlookers with phones out. And James Mitchell, looking like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Ma'am, Marcus addressed Victoria directly. I'm Marcus Washington, CEO of Washington Enterprises. I'm here for our partnership renewal ceremony. But Ms. Cooper seems to believe I'm trespassing. Victoria's face went white. She knew that name. Washington Enterprises was their flagship client, the partnership that had made her career and the Grande Royale's reputation. The renewal ceremony was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to strengthen their most important business relationship. Mr. Washington, Victoria said carefully, I sincerely apologize for any confusion. Confusion. Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge now. Ms. Cooper has spent the last 20 minutes publicly humiliating me, threatening to have me arrested and questioning my right to exist in your lobby. Is that what you call confusion? Victoria looked at Madison with growing horror. Madison, what exactly did you do? Madison opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. How could she explain that she'd seen a black man in an expensive suit and immediately assumed he was a threat? How could she justify the finger, snapping the dismissive tone, the complete disregard for his dignity as a human being? I was protecting the hotel's reputation. Madison finally managed, by harassing our biggest client. Victoria's voice could have frozen water. Marcus held up his phone, which had been recording the entire conversation. Ms. Sterling, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about one employee's behavior. This is about your hotel's culture, your training procedures, and your commitment to treating all guests with basic human dignity. Victoria felt her stomach drop. A discrimination lawsuit from their biggest client could destroy not just this hotel, but potentially the entire Atlas Hospitality Group. The financial implications were staggering. Elena's live stream had reached over 600 viewers. The comments were a mix of outrage and amazement. The regional director just showed up. This is better than any TV drama. CEO is about to own this hotel. Justice is coming. Bob Johnson approached Marcus with the dignity of someone who'd fought these battles before. Son, I want you to know that what I witnessed here today was clear, unambiguous discrimination. You have allies here, witnesses who will testify to exactly what happened. Marcus nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Bob Johnson. And I've been fighting this kind of injustice for 50 years. Victoria's phone started ringing. Corporate headquarters, the board of directors, the media relations department. Word was spreading fast, and the fallout was beginning. Mr. Washington, Victoria said desperately, surely we can resolve this matter privately. Marcus smiled, and once again it wasn't a pleasant expression. Ms. Sterling, privacy is exactly what allowed this to happen. Ms. Cooper felt comfortable discriminating against me because she thought no one important was watching. But everyone's watching now. He gestured toward Elena's live stream, toward the phones recording throughout the lobby, toward the growing crowd of witnesses. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And that's when Victoria Sterling realized that she was about to preside over the most expensive discrimination incident in hospitality history. Victoria Sterling's phone buzzed incessantly in her hand as she stood in the wreckage of what should have been a routine partnership renewal. The messages were piling up: corporate legal, the board of directors, and what looked like media inquiries. But none of that mattered right now, because standing in front of her was Marcus Washington, the CEO who could destroy her career with a single decision. Mr. Washington, Victoria began, her voice carefully measured. I understand your frustration, but surely we can. Can what? Marcus interrupted, his patience finally showing cracks. Pretend this didn't happen. Sweep it under the rug. Ms. Sterling, your general manager just spent 20 minutes trying to have me arrested for the crime of existing while black in your lobby. Madison finally found her voice, desperation making her bold. That's not what this was about. I was following security protocols. What protocols? Bob Johnson's voice cut through Madison's excuses like a blade. The protocol that says black men don't belong in luxury hotels. Because that's the only protocol I see being followed here. Elena adjusted her phone to capture the exchange. Her Instagram Live had exploded to over 800 viewers, and the story was spreading across social media like wildfire. The comments were brutal. "She's done for $10 million mistake. This is why we film everything." About time someone with power fought back. Marcus opened his briefcase fully for the first time, revealing the complete scope of documents inside. Partnership agreements, financial projections, board meeting agendas, and legal contracts were all neatly organized in leather portfolios. Each document bore the official seal of Washington Enterprises and the unmistakable signatures of corporate executives. Ms. Sterling, Marcus said, pulling out a thick folder, "Let me help you understand the magnitude of what just happened here." He spread the documents across a nearby table, and Victoria's face went progressively paler as she read. The Washington Enterprises partnership wasn't just about hotel bookings. It was a comprehensive agreement that included 847 room nights per quarter at an average rate of $340 per night. Exclusive catering contracts for corporate events, conference room rentals for board meetings, and client presentations. Partnership with 23 Atlas. Hospitality properties across 3 states. A 5-year renewal worth $51 million total. This renewal ceremony, Marcus continued, was supposed to be a celebration. I was planning to announce an expansion of our partnership, potentially doubling our annual commitment. Victoria felt like she was falling into an abyss. Doubling the partnership would mean over $20 million annually. It would make Washington Enterprises Atlas Hospitality's largest client by far. But more importantly, Marcus said, his voice hardening, "I want you to understand what really happened here. Your employee didn't just make a mistake. She made a choice. She looked at me and decided that a black man in an expensive suit must be a criminal, a trespasser, someone who didn't belong." Madison tried to speak, but Marcus held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Ms. Cooper has had multiple opportunities to de-escalate this situation. She could have asked for identification. She could have verified my claims. She could have treated me with basic human dignity. Instead, she chose humiliation as her first, second, and third option." James Mitchell, who had been silent throughout most of the confrontation, finally found his courage. "Mr. Washington, sir, I tried to intervene. I knew something was wrong." "You tried to whisper warnings to your boss." Marcus corrected. "You didn't try to stop discrimination from happening. There's a difference." The harsh truth of Marcus's words hit James like a physical blow. He had known Madison was wrong, but he'd chosen job security over moral courage. Derek Thompson, the security guard, stepped forward. "Mr. Washington, I want to apologize. I should have questioned the orders instead of just following them." Marcus studied Derek for a moment. "What's your background?" "Officer Thompson, military, sir. 8 years. Army, 4 years hotel security. Then you understand the difference between lawful orders and unlawful ones. What Ms. Cooper asked you to do wasn't security work. It was enforcement of her personal biases." Derek's face flushed with shame. "Yes, sir. You're absolutely right." Victoria watched this exchange with growing horror. Her general manager had committed blatant discrimination. Her assistant manager had failed to intervene, and her security guard had nearly become complicit in racial profiling. This wasn't just about one employee's prejudice. It was about systemic failure at every level. Marcus's phone rang again. This time the caller ID read, "Board member, Catherine Chen." Marcus answered and put it on speaker. "Marcus, where are you?" Catherine's voice carried clearly across the lobby. "We're all assembled and ready for the celebration." "Catherine, We have a situation. The hotel management has some concerns about our partnership. Concerns. What kind of concerns? Marcus looked directly at Madison. They're questioning whether Washington Enterprises has legitimate business with this hotel. In fact, they've threatened to have me arrested for trespassing. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Then Catherine's voice, ice-cold. Marcus, are you telling me that Atlas Hospitality Group is discriminating against our CEO? That appears to be the case. I see. Should I contact our legal department about activating the discrimination clause in our contract? Victoria felt her heart stop. Every major corporate contract included discrimination clauses, but she'd never seen one activated. The financial and legal implications would be catastrophic. Not yet, Marcus replied. Let's see if this can be resolved professionally. He ended the call and looked at Victoria. Ms. Sterling, that was Catherine Chen, our chief legal officer and former federal prosecutor. She's very interested in discrimination cases, particularly when they involve Fortune 500 companies. Victoria's phone exploded with notifications. The story had reached Twitter, where #Grande Royale racism was trending nationally. LinkedIn was lighting up with posts from business leaders expressing outrage. Someone had shared Elena's live stream to Reddit, where it was climbing the front page of multiple subreddits. But the real bomb came when James Mitchell's phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking tech billionaire Marcus Washington allegedly discriminated against at luxury hotel. How did the media find out so quickly? Victoria asked weakly. Elena held up her phone. I have 200 people watching this live. The story's been shared thousands of times in the last 10 minutes. Bob Johnson stepped closer to Marcus. Son, I want you to know something. I've seen a lot of discrimination in my 70 years, but I've never seen someone handle it with the grace and dignity you've shown today. Marcus nodded respectfully. Mr. Johnson, people like you fought so that people like me could have the power to demand better. I don't take that responsibility lightly. Madison finally broke her silence, desperation making her voice shrill. Mr. Washington, please, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I can fix this. I can make it right. Marcus turned to face her fully, for the first time since the confrontation began. Miss Cooper, how many other people have you treated this way? How many other black professionals have been humiliated in this lobby when I wasn't here to witness it? Madison opened and closed her mouth, unable to form words. Derek Thompson cleared his throat. Sir, there was an incident last month. A young black woman interviewing for a position here. Ms. Cooper made me verify her credentials 3 times and kept her waiting in the lobby for 2 hours. Derek Madison hissed, but the damage was done. What position was she interviewing for? Marcus asked. Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator, Derek replied quietly. The irony was so bitter, it was almost funny. Madison had discriminated against someone applying for a job to prevent discrimination. A businessman near the elevators spoke up. I witnessed similar behavior last week. A black family with confirmed reservations. She made them prove their booking before allowing them to check in. More voices joined in. I saw her question a black businessman's right to use the executive lounge. She always seems to randomly select black guests for additional security screening. There was that incident with the delivery driver last month. A pattern of discrimination was being exposed in real time, documented by dozens of witnesses, and broadcast to over 1,500 people watching Elena's live stream. Victoria felt the full weight of legal liability crushing down on her. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was evidence of systematic discrimination that could result in federal investigations, class action lawsuits, and criminal charges. Marcus pulled out his phone and made another call. Timothy, please conference in our PR director and head of legal. The call connected quickly. Mr. Washington. This is Sarah Chen, from legal. and Mike Rodriguez from Public Relations. We're aware of the situation developing at the Grande Royale. Sarah, what's our legal position regarding the discrimination clause in our Atlas hospitality contract? Sarah's voice was crisp and professional. Sir, based on the documented evidence of racial discrimination, we have grounds for immediate contract termination with full legal protections. We could also pursue civil rights litigation under federal and state law. Victoria felt her knees buckle. Federal civil rights litigation could mean millions in damages, not to mention the complete destruction of Atlas Hospitality's reputation. Mike Marcus continued, "What's the media situation?" "Sir, the story is trending on all major platforms. We're receiving interview requests from CNN, NBC, Fox Business, and the Wall Street Journal. The hashtag Grande Royale Racism has over 50,000 mentions and climbing." Madison slumped against the reception desk, the full magnitude of her actions finally hitting her. She hadn't just made a mistake. She'd created a public relations disaster that could destroy the entire hotel chain. Marcus ended the call and looked around the lobby at the faces watching him. Some hopeful, some terrified, all waiting to see what he would do with the power he held. "Ms. Sterling," Marcus said finally, "I'm going to make you an offer. One chance to keep this partnership, but it comes with non-negotiable conditions." Victoria nodded eagerly. "Anything, Mr. Washington. Name your terms." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them. "We'll see about that." Marcus Washington stood in the center of the Grande Royale's marble lobby, surrounded by the wreckage of Madison Cooper's prejudice and the desperate hope of Victoria Sterling's damage control. The power dynamics had completely reversed. The man who'd been threatened with arrest now held the future of an entire hotel chain in his hands. "Before I outline my terms," Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned to command respect rather than demand it, "I want everyone here to understand something important. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about destroying careers or bankrupting companies. This is about education, accountability, and creating systemic change." Elena's live stream had reached over 1,500 viewers, and the comments were exploding. Classy response from the CEO: education over litigation. Respect. This man is showing real leadership. Most expensive teaching moment ever. Bob Johnson nodded approvingly. "Son, that's the kind of thinking that changes the world instead of just punishing it." Marcus opened his briefcase one final time and pulled out a thick document labeled Corporate Diversity and Inclusion Implementation Framework, Washington Enterprises Standard Protocol. "I had my legal team prepare this last night," Marcus explained, handing the document to Victoria. "It's a comprehensive framework for eliminating discrimination in hospitality settings." Victoria's hands trembled as she accepted the document. The cover page alone was intimidating: mandatory implementation protocol for Washington Enterprises Partnership. Continuation. 127 pages. 127 pages, Victoria whispered. "Systematic discrimination requires systematic solutions," Marcus replied. Page 3 outlines the basic requirements. Victoria flipped to page 3 and began reading aloud, her voice growing smaller with each item. Monthly unconscious bias training for all staff members. Diversity metrics tied to management performance bonuses. Independent quarterly audits by certified bias assessment firms. Anonymous guest discrimination reporting through digital platforms. Community partnership programs with local civil rights organizations. Madison had gone completely pale. "What does this mean for me?" Marcus turned to face her directly. "Ms. Cooper, you're going to become our test case. A 90-day intensive diversity immersion program." 90 days. Madison's voice cracked. "You'll shadow employees from different backgrounds to understand their experiences. You'll undergo comprehensive bias testing and training. You'll attend community forums about hospitality discrimination. You'll meet with families affected by racial profiling. And you'll write detailed monthly reflection reports documenting your learning process. James Mitchell stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Washington, what about during those 90 days? Who manages the hotel? Marcus looked at James with new interest. You seem to have good instincts, Mr. Mitchell, even if you lack the courage to act on them. You'll serve as acting general manager during Ms. Cooper's educational leave. James straightened up, surprised to be acknowledged positively for the first time in years. Derek Thompson cleared his throat. Sir, what about security protocols? I want to make sure I never participate in discrimination again. Officer Thompson, you'll be attending the bias intervention training alongside Ms. Cooper. But more than that, you'll help develop new security protocols that protect guests from discrimination while maintaining legitimate safety measures. Derek nodded firmly. Yes, sir. I'd be honored to do that. Victoria was still reading through the framework document, her corporate mind calculating costs. Mr. Washington, these requirements are extensive. The training alone would cost approximately $340,000 annually across your hotel chain, Marcus finished. I had my CFO run the numbers. It's exactly 3.3% of what you make from our contract. The precision of his preparation was staggering. Marcus had anticipated this confrontation and come prepared with solutions, not just complaints. But that's just the beginning, Marcus continued. Ms. Cooper's immersion program includes community service components. She'll volunteer at organizations that serve people affected by discrimination. She'll attend bias interruption workshops. She'll participate in diversity forums where she can listen to stories from people who've experienced what I experienced today. Madison found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. Mr. Washington, I accept these terms. I need to understand how wrong I was. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Ms. Cooper, this isn't punishment. It's education. Education that should have happened long before today, but better late than never. Elena's live stream captured this exchange, and the viewer comments reflected a range of emotions. He's giving her a chance to grow. Education over destruction. This is powerful. She better take this seriously. Second chances with accountability. Victoria looked up from the document. Mr. Washington, there's a section here about financial penalties for violations. Can you explain what this means? Page 47 outlines the accountability structure, Marcus replied. First incident of documented discrimination triggers mandatory retraining for involved staff. Second incident results in contract review and potential termination. Third incident ends our partnership immediately with no possibility of renewal. 3 strikes. Elena narrated to her audience. Fair, but firm consequences. Bob Johnson approached Marcus with evident respect. Son, I've been fighting discrimination for 50 years, and I've never seen anyone handle it with this combination of strength and grace. You're not just demanding justice, you're creating a blueprint for change. Marcus nodded gratefully. Mr. Johnson, people like you fought so that people like me could have seats at tables where decisions get made. I don't take that responsibility lightly. Victoria's phone had been buzzing constantly, but she finally answered when she saw it was corporate legal calling. Victoria, this is David Chen from legal. We're aware of the situation. What's the status? Victoria put the call on speaker. David, Mr. Washington has presented a comprehensive diversity implementation framework. He's offering to continue our partnership if we agree to systematic changes. What kind of changes? Marcus stepped forward. Mr. Chen, this is Marcus Washington. Your hotel chain will implement bias training, accountability measures, community partnerships, and transparent reporting systems. The investment is roughly 3.3% of our annual contract value. There was silence on the other end of the call. Then David's voice. Mr. Washington, frankly, We expected a lawsuit and contract termination. This is unexpected. Mr. Chen, lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately destructive. Education is an investment that pays dividends for everyone. James Mitchell had been listening carefully to the conversation. Mr. Washington, I have a question about implementation. How do we ensure these changes actually work and aren't just paperwork exercises? It was an insightful question, and Marcus looked at James with increased respect. Excellent point, Mr. Mitchell. Page 73 outlines the monitoring and evaluation protocols. Independent auditors will conduct quarterly assessments. Guest feedback will be tracked and analyzed. Staff performance will be measured against diversity metrics. And most importantly, community members will have direct channels to report concerns. Madison finally spoke up, her voice stronger than before. Mr. Washington, I want you to know that reading about my behavior today, seeing how many people I've hurt, I'm horrified by who I've become. This program isn't just something I'm accepting. It's something I need. Marcus nodded slowly. Ms. Cooper, that's the first thing you've said today that gives me hope for your future. Elena's live stream had reached over 2,000 viewers, and the story was spreading across social media platforms. The narrative was shifting from simple discrimination to transformation and accountability. Victoria closed the document and looked at Marcus. Mr. Washington, if we agree to implement this framework in full, do we have your commitment to continue our partnership? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering. Ms. Sterling, you have my commitment to give you the opportunity to earn continued partnership. But understand, this isn't a one-time training session or a surface-level policy change. This is a fundamental shift in how your organization operates. We understand, Victoria replied quickly. Do you? Marcus asked pointedly. Because implementing this framework means acknowledging that discrimination has been a systemic problem in your organization. It means being transparent about past failures. It means investing significant resources in change. And it means accepting that you'll be held accountable for results, not just intentions. The weight of his words settled over the lobby. This wasn't just about saving a business relationship. It was about moral leadership and corporate responsibility. Derek Thompson stepped forward. Mr. Washington, I want to say something. I've been in security for 12 years, and I've seen discrimination happen more times than I want to admit. Usually nothing comes of it. The victim leaves, the perpetrator faces no consequences, and the system stays broken. What you're offering here isn't just justice for today, it's prevention for tomorrow. Bob Johnson approached the group. If I may add something, he said with the dignity of someone who'd spent decades fighting for civil rights. What makes this moment special isn't just that discrimination was exposed. It's that someone with power chose construction over destruction. This could become a model for how institutions can transform themselves. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Timothy. Sir, board members are asking if they should proceed with the renewal ceremony or prepare alternative arrangements. Marcus held up the phone so Victoria could see the message. Ms. Sterling, my board is waiting for a decision. They're prepared to sign with Atlas Hospitality Group, or they're prepared to move our business elsewhere. The choice is yours. Victoria looked around the lobby, at Madison's tear-stained face, at James's determined expression, at Derek's newfound resolve, at the crowd of witnesses who had documented everything at the live stream that had made this moment historic. Mr. Washington, Victoria said firmly, Atlas Hospitality Group accepts your framework in its entirety. We commit to implementing every requirement, meeting every standard, and submitting to every accountability measure you've outlined. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the hotel, and this time it was genuine warmth rather than cold calculation. Excellent. Timothy will send over the contract modifications this afternoon. The first quarterly audit will be scheduled for next month. Elena's live stream exploded with celebration, justice served. This is how change happens. Education over litigation wins. Most expensive lesson ever learned. Bob Johnson extended his hand to Marcus. Son, you've given this old activist hope that the next generation understands how to use power responsibly. Marcus shook Bob's hand firmly. Mr. Johnson, everything I accomplished today was built on the foundation you and your generation laid down. Thank you for showing us the way. Madison approached Marcus hesitantly. Mr. Washington, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm committed to becoming someone worthy of the second chance you're giving me. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Ms. Cooper, forgiveness is earned through actions, not words. Show me through your behavior over the next 90 days that you understand why this moment happened and how to prevent it from happening again. I will, Madison promised. I absolutely will. As the immediate crisis resolved, Marcus checked his watch. 3:15 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe I have a board meeting to attend. Ms. Sterling, shall we proceed with the partnership renewal ceremony? Victoria practically sagged with relief. Yes, Mr. Washington. Absolutely yes. As Marcus gathered his documents and prepared to head to the presidential suite, Elena addressed her live stream audience one final time, and that everyone is how you turn a moment of injustice into a movement for change. This story isn't over. It's just beginning. Because real change doesn't happen in a day. It happens through sustained commitment, accountability, and the courage to do better. The lobby began to empty as the immediate drama concluded, but the real work was just beginning. Madison Cooper had 90 days to transform herself. Victoria Sterling had months to implement systematic change across her organization. And Marcus Washington had proven that true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to educate and the grace to build bridges where others would burn them down. The most expensive discrimination incident in hospitality history had become something far more valuable, a blueprint for how institutions can choose growth over destruction, education over litigation, and hope over hate. By 4 p.m. that Tuesday afternoon, the story of what happened at the Grande Royale Hotel was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Elena's Instagram Live had ended with over 3,000 viewers, but the recording was being shared, reposted, and discussed on every major platform. Marcus Washington sat in the presidential suite with his board members, having successfully completed the partnership renewal ceremony, but his phone continued buzzing with notifications. The story had evolved far beyond a simple discrimination incident. It had become a case study in corporate leadership and social justice. Marcus said Catherine Chen, Washington Enterprises Chief Legal Officer, CNN, is calling this the $10 million teaching moment. Forbes wants to do a cover story on your approach to corporate accountability. The Harvard Business Review is requesting permission to develop a case study, added CFO Michael Torres. They're calling it Transformative Leadership in Crisis Management. But Marcus was more interested in the grassroots response than the media attention. On Twitter, #Grande Royale. Racism had evolved into #education over litigation. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination alongside examples of how bias could be confronted constructively. Meanwhile, 3 floors below the transformation was already beginning. Victoria Sterling had called an emergency meeting with her entire senior staff. The conference room was packed with department heads, managers, and supervisors, all of whom had been briefed on the afternoon's events. I want to be absolutely clear, Victoria announced to her team. What happened today was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of systemic problems in our organization that we've ignored for too long. She held up Marcus's 127-page diversity framework. This document represents our roadmap to becoming better. not just as a hotel, but as human beings. Every single requirement will be implemented. Every accountability measure will be enforced. And anyone who isn't committed to this transformation can find employment elsewhere. James Mitchell, still adjusting to his new role as acting general manager, raised his hand. Victoria, I've been thinking about staff training. We should start immediately, even before the formal program begins. I want every employee to understand what happened today and why it can never happen again. Victoria nodded approvingly. Excellent initiative, James. Make it happen. In another part of the hotel, Madison Cooper sat alone in her office, reading through victim testimonials that had been flooding social media. Story after story of Black professionals, families, and individuals who had experienced similar discrimination at hotels, restaurants, and businesses across the country. One comment particularly struck her. I'm a pediatric surgeon, but the hotel manager saw a Black woman in scrubs and assumed I was housekeeping. She wouldn't let me access the executive lounge I'd paid for until I produced 3 forms of ID and my medical license. Another, my son is a software engineer for Google, but the concierge treated him like a potential thief when he asked about conference room availability. It took 40 minutes and a call to corporate before anyone would help him. The stories went on, painting a picture of widespread discrimination that Madison was only beginning to understand. Each testimonial was a mirror reflecting her own biases and the harm they had caused. Madison picked up her phone and dialed a number. She'd never thought she'd call the Community Justice Center, where she would begin her 90-day immersion program. Hello, she said, when someone answered. This is Madison Cooper from the Grande Royale Hotel. I believe Dr. Williams is expecting my call about the diversity training program. Back in the lobby, Derek Thompson was implementing immediate changes to security protocols. He'd removed the random guest screening procedures that had disproportionately targeted Black guests and was working with James Mitchell to develop new training materials for the security team. The thing is, Derek explained to a fellow security officer, real security threats don't correlate with race, age, or appearance. Actual suspicious behavior looks nothing like what we were trained to watch for. Elena Rodriguez had returned to her position behind the concierge desk, but her phone continued buzzing with friend requests, interview requests, and messages from people thanking her for documenting the incident. Elena. One message read, "Your live stream saved my faith in justice. Thank you for having the courage to film what happened." Another, "I'm a journalism student, and I want to study how citizen journalism can create accountability in real time. Your coverage today was a masterclass." Elena realized that her accidental role as a citizen journalist had opened up new possibilities for her career and her activism. The story was having effects far beyond the Grande Royale. Other hotel chains were proactively reviewing their policies and training programs. Insurance companies were calling to offer discounts for bias prevention certification. Business schools were already developing curriculum around the Washington model of conflict resolution. At competing hotels across Manhattan, managers were having emergency meetings about their own potential vulnerabilities. The Hilton, the Marriott, the Ritz-Carlton. Every major chain was asking the same questions. Could this happen at our properties? How would we handle it? What policies do we need to change immediately? Dr. Sarah Martinez, a diversity consultant who worked with Fortune 500 companies, had already received 7 calls from hospitality groups requesting immediate assessments. The Washington incident has made every executive in America nervous about their own discrimination liability, she explained to a reporter. But more importantly, it's created a conversation about proactive change rather than reactive damage control. The financial markets were responding as well. Atlas Hospitality Group's stock had initially dropped 4% in after-hours trading as news of the discrimination incident spread. But by the end of the day, it had recovered and was actually trading up 2%, as investors recognized the potential value of implementing industry-leading diversity standards. The market is rewarding Atlas for choosing transformation over litigation, explained financial analyst Robert Kim on CNBC. Investors understand that the Washington Enterprises framework could become a competitive advantage if implemented effectively. Meanwhile, social media was exploding with reactions from celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. This is how leaders lead, with grace, wisdom, and a commitment to education over destruction. Oprah Winfrey. The most powerful response to discrimination is creating systems that prevent it from happening to others. Barack Obama. Every CEO should study Marcus Washington's approach to this crisis. This is masterclass leadership. Richard Branson. But the most meaningful responses were coming from ordinary people, sharing their own stories and experiences. I was fired from a hotel job for refusing to randomly search black guests' bags. Seeing Mr. Washington demand accountability gives me hope that things can actually change. My daughter was humiliated at a hotel last year for looking suspicious while wearing her Harvard Medical School sweatshirt. Today's story shows that speaking up matters. I'm a hotel manager, and I'm using this incident to have honest conversations with my staff about unconscious bias. Change starts with acknowledging the problem. Bob Johnson. The civil rights veteran who had witnessed the entire confrontation was being interviewed by local news stations about the historical significance of the moment. What made today special, Bob told CBS New York, wasn't just that discrimination was exposed. We see that every day. What was special was that someone with power chose education over revenge. Marcus Washington could have destroyed careers and filed lawsuits. Instead, he created a pathway for transformation. That's the kind of leadership that changes society. The Community Justice Center, where Madison would begin her training, was receiving calls from corporations across the country requesting similar programs for their employees. Dr. Kesha Williams, who would oversee Madison's education, explained the approach to NPR. Punishment creates resentment. Education creates understanding. When people truly comprehend the harm their biases cause, they become powerful advocates for change. We're not trying to shame Ms. Cooper. We're trying to help her understand how she can become part of the solution. By evening, the Washington Enterprises framework was being downloaded from their website by companies in dozens of industries. The 127-page document was being studied by executives who wanted to implement similar programs before they faced their own discrimination crises. Tech companies in Silicon Valley were particularly interested in Marcus's approach. The tech industry has its own issues with bias and inclusion, explained Google's chief diversity officer in a statement. The Washington model provides a blueprint for addressing these challenges proactively rather than reactively. Law schools were already incorporating the incident into their civil rights curricula. Professor Janet Williams at Georgetown Law told her students, "This case demonstrates how power can be used constructively to create systemic change. Mr. Washington chose to be a builder rather than a destroyer." International media were picking up the story as well. The BBC ran a feature titled, "American CEO Turns Discrimination into Education." Le Monde called it a new model for corporate social responsibility. The story was resonating globally because discrimination and the abuse of power were universal problems requiring universal solutions. But perhaps the most significant ripple effect was happening in corporate boardrooms across America. CEOs were asking their HR departments tough questions about their own diversity training, bias prevention measures, and accountability systems. The Washington incident has created a new standard, explained corporate consultant Maria Rodriguez. Companies are realizing that surface-level diversity training isn't enough. They need comprehensive, measurable, accountable programs if they want to avoid becoming the next viral discrimination story. As the day ended, Marcus Washington sat in his Manhattan office, reviewing the media coverage and social media response. His phone showed hundreds of missed calls from reporters, interview requests, and speaking invitations. But the message that mattered most came from his grandmother in Detroit. "Baby, I saw the news. Your grandfather would be so proud. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who comes after you. That's what real power is for." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Everything I learned about dignity and strength came from you and Grandpa. Thank you for teaching me that the point of having power is using it to lift others up." The immediate crisis at the Grande Royale Hotel was over, but the transformation it had sparked was just beginning. In conference rooms and classrooms, in corporate offices and community centers, people were asking new questions about bias power and the possibility of change. Madison Cooper's 90-day journey was about to begin. James Mitchell was preparing to prove himself as a leader committed to justice. Victoria Sterling was facing the challenge of transforming an entire organization. And Marcus Washington had proven that true leadership lies not in the ability to destroy one's enemies, but in the wisdom to turn enemies into allies through education, accountability, and grace. The most expensive discrimination incident in hospitality history had become something far more valuable, a roadmap for how society could choose growth over destruction, understanding over hatred, and hope over despair. The ripples were spreading, and there was no telling how far they would reach. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, the Grande Royale Hotel looked the same from the outside, but everything else had transformed. The marble lobby still gleamed under crystal chandeliers. The orchids still perfumed the air, but the culture of the establishment had undergone a complete metamorphosis. Madison Cooper stood in that same lobby on a Tuesday morning in April, but she was no longer the woman who had snapped her fingers at Marcus Washington. The 90-day diversity immersion program had ended 3 months ago, but Madison's education was ongoing and would be for the rest of her life. "Good morning, Dr. Martinez," Madison said warmly to a Latino woman in a lab coat who was checking in for a medical conference. "Welcome back to the Grande Royale. How was your flight from Houston?" Dr. Martinez smiled, surprised by the personal attention. "Very smooth, thank you. I appreciate you remembering me from last year's conference." Madison had learned the power of seeing people as individuals rather than stereotypes. Dr. Martinez wasn't someone who might not belong. She was a renowned cardiologist whose research had saved thousands of lives. Every guest had a story, accomplishments, dignity that deserved recognition. The transformation hadn't been easy. Madison's first week at the Community Justice Center had been devastating. She'd sat in circles with families who had experienced discrimination, listening to stories that broke her heart and opened her eyes. "I remember the moment everything clicked," Madison told James Mitchell during their weekly check-in meeting. "It was day 12 of the program. I was listening to a mother talk about how her 16-year-old son had been followed around a department store for 20 minutes. The security guard never approached him, never asked if he needed help, just stalked him like he was a criminal." Madison paused, the memory still painful. "And I realized that I had been that security guard. Not literally, but I had been the person who looked at Marcus Washington and saw a threat instead of a human being. I had been the person who made assumptions based on skin color rather than character." James nodded thoughtfully. As acting general manager for the past 6 months, he had witnessed Madison's complete transformation. The monthly reflection reports you've been writing have been incredible to read. The growth you've documented is remarkable. Madison's reports had indeed become powerful testimonies to the possibility of change. Her March report had included this passage: "I met with the family of Dr. Michael Johnson, the pediatric surgeon who was denied access to the executive lounge at our sister property last year. When I apologized, his wife asked me a question that haunts me. How many other families have been hurt by assumptions like yours? I don't have an answer, but I'm committed to making sure the number stops growing. The Grande Royale's transformation extended far beyond Madison's personal journey. The hotel had become a model for the hospitality industry, attracting visitors who wanted to see the diversity and inclusion framework in action. Derek Thompson had evolved from a security guard who followed orders without question to the hotel's director of inclusive security protocols. His military background combined with his new understanding of bias had made him uniquely qualified to develop security procedures that protected guests without profiling them. The old system taught us to watch for suspicious behavior, Derek explained to a group of visiting hotel managers from across the country. But suspicious behavior was never defined objectively. It became code for people who don't look like they belong here. The new protocols focus on actual security threats, unattended bags, aggressive behavior violations of specific policies, not on racial or ethnic profiling. The results spoke for themselves. Guest satisfaction scores had increased 34% over 6 months, with particular improvements in the categories of feeling welcomed and respectful treatment. More importantly, discrimination complaints had dropped to 0. Elena Rodriguez had leveraged her viral live stream into a career as a social justice journalist. Her documentation of the Washington incident had opened doors at major news organizations, and she now traveled the country covering stories of discrimination and accountability. The Grande Royale incident taught me that citizen journalism can create real-time accountability, Elena explained during a panel discussion at Columbia Journalism School. When we document injustice as it happens, we make it impossible to ignore or cover up. But more importantly, we create opportunities for redemption and education. Elena had returned to the Grande Royale several times to document the hotel's transformation. Her follow-up stories had gone viral as well, showing that change was possible when institutions committed to genuine reform rather than superficial gestures. Bob Johnson, the civil rights veteran, whose intervention had been crucial during the original incident, had become an unofficial advisor to the hotel's diversity program. At 78, Bob had seen enough false promises and hollow reforms to recognize genuine transformation when it occurred. What's different about the Grande Royale, Bob explained to his granddaughter during a visit to the hotel, is that they didn't just change their policies, they changed their hearts. Policy changes can be reversed when nobody's watching. Heart changes last forever. Bob's granddaughter, a recent graduate from Howard University's journalism program, was writing her master's thesis on the Washington incident and its aftermath. Grandpa, do you think this kind of transformation can be replicated at other institutions? Bob looked around the lobby, watching Madison warmly greet a black businessman, Derek respectfully assist an elderly Latino woman with her luggage, and James personally welcome a family that might have been questioned or ignored 6 months earlier. Baby girl, Bob said with satisfaction, transformation is contagious. When people see that change is possible, they start demanding it everywhere. The ripple effects were indeed spreading far beyond the Grande Royale. The Washington Enterprise's diversity framework had been implemented by 47 hotel chains, 63 restaurant groups, and hundreds of other businesses across the country. Corporate America had embraced what business schools were calling the Washington model, the idea that discrimination crises could be transformed into competitive advantages through proactive education and systemic reform. Marcus Washington himself had become an unlikely expert on corporate accountability. His speaking fees for diversity and leadership conferences had reached 6 figures, but Marcus donated every dollar to organizations fighting discrimination and promoting civil rights education. The irony, Marcus told a packed auditorium at the Harvard Business School, is that Madison Cooper's prejudice created more positive change than a dozen lawsuits could have achieved. Her willingness to undergo genuine transformation, rather than just going through the motions, has inspired thousands of other leaders to examine their own biases. The Harvard case study of the Washington incident had become required reading in business ethics courses across the country. Students studied not just what had gone wrong, but how the crisis had been transformed into an opportunity for growth. Dr. Kesha Williams, who had overseen Madison's training at the Community Justice Center, was now receiving requests from corporations worldwide. The center had expanded its programs to meet the demand for bias intervention training. What makes Madison's story special, Dr. Williams explained to a delegation of European business leaders, is that she didn't just complete our program, she embraced it. She didn't just learn about discrimination, she became an advocate against it. That's the difference between compliance and transformation. Madison's advocacy had indeed become legendary. She now traveled to other Atlas hospitality properties, sharing her story and helping implement diversity programs. Her presentations were raw, honest, and powerful. 6 months ago, Madison told a room full of hotel managers in Chicago, "I was the poster child for unconscious bias. I looked at one of the most successful Black entrepreneurs in America and saw a threat. I treated him like a criminal because my prejudices were stronger than my professionalism." The room was silent as Madison continued. But here's what I learned. Bias isn't just about individual bigotry. It's about systems training and cultures that teach us to fear difference instead of celebrating it. The only way to change is to acknowledge the problem, commit to education, and accept accountability for results. The Chicago managers gave Madison a standing ovation, but more importantly, they implemented comprehensive bias training programs at their properties within 30 days. Victoria Sterling had been promoted to Senior Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for all Atlas hospitality properties. The success of the Grande Royale transformation had made her a corporate star, but Victoria understood that her success was built on the courage of people like Marcus Washington and the redemption of people like Madison Cooper. The Washington incident taught us that diversity and inclusion aren't just moral imperatives, Victoria explained to the Atlas Board of Directors. They're business imperatives. Our properties that have implemented the full framework are outperforming our traditional locations in every metric that matters. Guest satisfaction, employee retention revenue per room, and brand reputation. The financial results were indeed remarkable. The Grande Royale had become Atlas Hospitality's most profitable property, driven by increased bookings from corporations that wanted to do business with socially responsible partners. Washington Enterprises had not only renewed their partnership, they had expanded it. The original $10.2 million annual contract had grown to $18.7 million, as Marcus added more properties and services to their corporate partnership. Marcus could have destroyed us, Victoria reflected during a quiet moment in her office. Instead, he saved us from ourselves. He forced us to confront our failures and gave us the tools to become better. That's not just leadership, that's grace. The transformation stories weren't limited to the hotel industry. The Washington incident had inspired similar accountability moments across corporate America. CEOs were proactively addressing bias in their organizations, rather than waiting for crises to force change. Tech companies in Silicon Valley were implementing Washington protocols for addressing discrimination complaints. Law firms were requiring bias training for all partners. Medical institutions were examining their own patterns of disparate treatment. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was happening in Madison Cooper's personal life. The woman who had once seen difference as a threat now celebrated it as strength. Her apartment was filled with books about civil rights history, cultural competency, and social justice. Her social circle included people from backgrounds she had once feared or ignored. I'm not the same person who snapped her fingers at Marcus Washington, Madison wrote in her 6-month reflection report. That woman was small, scared, and trapped by her own limitations. I'm learning to be someone bigger, someone who builds bridges instead of walls, someone who sees possibility instead of problems. The report concluded with a commitment that had become Madison's life philosophy. I will spend the rest of my career and the rest of my life proving that people can change. Not just their policies or their procedures, but their hearts. Because if I can transform from a symbol of discrimination into an advocate for justice, then change is possible for anyone. 6 months after the most expensive discrimination incident in hospitality history, the Grande Royale Hotel had become something unprecedented, a symbol of hope, proof that institutions could change, that people could grow, and that crisis could become catalyst for unprecedented transformation. The marble lobby still gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but now it gleamed for everyone. As our story draws to a close, it's important to understand that what happened at the Grande Royale Hotel on that October afternoon wasn't just about one incident of discrimination or one CEO's response to injustice. It was about the choice we all face when confronted with the opportunity to create change. Do we destroy or do we build? Do we seek revenge or do we pursue education? Do we perpetuate cycles of harm or do we break them? Marcus Washington made his choice in that marble lobby, surrounded by witnesses and watched by thousands online. He chose to be a teacher rather than a destroyer, an educator rather than a litigator. That choice transformed not just Madison Cooper or the Grande Royale Hotel, but an entire industry's approach to discrimination and accountability. True power. Marcus explained during his keynote address at the National Civil Rights Convention a year later, isn't about having the ability to destroy your enemies. True power is having the wisdom to turn your enemies into allies through education, understanding, and the patient work of building bridges. The audience of civil rights leaders, business executives, and community activists gave Marcus a standing ovation, but the real applause came from the measurable changes his approach had created across corporate America. By the 1-year anniversary of the Washington incident, the transformation was undeniable. The Washington Enterprises Diversity Framework had been implemented by over 200 companies across 12 industries. Discrimination complaints in participating organizations had dropped by 67%. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by an average of 41%. Customer loyalty metrics had improved across all demographic categories. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real impact was in the individual lives that had been changed. Madison Cooper had become one of the most sought-after diversity trainers in the country. Her presentations combined the authenticity of someone who had experienced genuine transformation with the credibility of someone who understood the business case for inclusion. I don't speak as someone who always understood these issues, Madison told audiences across the country. I speak as someone who was part of the problem and chose to become part of the solution. If I can change, anyone can change. But change requires honesty, humility, and hard work. Madison's work had directly influenced policy changes at hundreds of businesses. Her story had been featured in documentaries, academic papers, and business school curricula. But more importantly, she had become a living example of the possibility of redemption and growth. Derek Thompson had parlayed his experience into a consulting firm that helped security companies eliminate racial profiling from their protocols. His military background and personal transformation made him uniquely qualified to help other security professionals understand the difference between legitimate protection and discriminatory harassment. Real security isn't about assuming threats based on appearance. Derek explained to police departments and private security firms. Real security is about identifying actual suspicious behavior while treating every person with dignity and respect. Elena Rodriguez had built a successful career as a social justice journalist, but she never forgot the live stream that started it all. She regularly returned to the Grande Royale to document the ongoing success of their transformation program. The Washington incident taught me that citizen journalism isn't just about exposing problems, Elena wrote in her Pulitzer Prize-nominated series on corporate accountability. It's about creating opportunities for solutions. When we document injustice, we create the possibility for justice. Bob Johnson had lived to see the kind of systemic change he had fought for his entire life. At 79, Bob served on the advisory board of the Marcus Washington Foundation for Corporate Accountability, helping guide the organization's mission of promoting diversity and inclusion in American business. "I've seen a lot of change in my years," Bob reflected during an interview on the anniversary of the incident. "But I've never seen change happen as fast or as comprehensively as what followed that day at the Grande Royale. When people with power choose to use it responsibly, miracles become possible." The Marcus Washington Foundation had grown into a major force for corporate reform. With an endowment of $50 million contributed by Marcus personally, the foundation provided grants for bias training, supported research into discrimination prevention, and recognized companies that demonstrated exceptional commitment to inclusion. But Marcus's greatest pride wasn't in the foundation or the fame or the business success that had followed the incident. His greatest pride was in the letters he received from people whose lives had been changed by the model he had created. A hotel manager in Seattle wrote, "Your approach to the Grande Royale situation inspired me to examine my own biases. I realized I was perpetuating discrimination without even knowing it. The training program we implemented based on your framework has transformed our workplace culture." A security guard in Atlanta wrote, "I saw Derek Thompson speak about his transformation, and it made me realize I could choose to be part of the solution. I'm now studying criminal justice with a focus on bias-free policing." A corporate executive in Denver wrote, "After studying the Washington case, our company proactively implemented comprehensive diversity training. We haven't had a single discrimination complaint in 18 months, and our employee satisfaction scores are at all-time highs." The stories went on and on. Individuals and institutions choosing growth over stagnation, understanding over ignorance, inclusion over exclusion. Dr. Keisha Williams at the Community Justice Center had seen her small organization grow into a national resource for bias intervention training. The center now operated in 15 cities and had trained over 10,000 people using the curriculum developed during Madison Cooper's transformation. What the Washington incident proved, Dr. Williams explained to a congressional committee studying discrimination in the workplace, is that bias can be unlearned just as surely as it was learned. But it requires commitment, resources, and accountability. You can't just send someone to a one-day workshop and expect transformation. Real change takes time, effort, and genuine commitment to growth. The Congressional Committee ultimately passed legislation requiring federal contractors to implement comprehensive bias training programs. The legislation, nicknamed the Washington Standards, was signed into law 2 years after the Grande Royale incident. James Mitchell had become general manager not just of the Grande Royale, but of 3 other Atlas hospitality properties. His leadership during the transformation had marked him as someone who could navigate complex social and business challenges with integrity and effectiveness. The incident taught me that staying silent in the face of injustice makes you complicit in it, James explained to a group of hospitality management students. Leadership isn't just about running efficient operations. It's about creating environments where every person is treated with dignity and respect. Victoria Sterling's promotion to Chief Diversity Officer for Atlas Hospitality Group had made her one of the most influential figures in corporate diversity and inclusion. But Victoria understood that her success was built on the courage of people who had been willing to confront hard truths and do difficult work. The Grande Royale transformation didn't happen because we were naturally good people, Victoria told her peers at a corporate leadership conference. It happened because Marcus Washington forced us to confront our failures and gave us the tools to become better. The question every leader should ask is, are we waiting for a crisis to force change? Or are we choosing to change proactively? As the years passed, the Washington incident became more than a business case study or a social justice milestone. It became a template for how individuals and institutions could choose transformation over defensiveness, growth over stagnation, and hope over despair. The phrase, "What would Marcus do?" became shorthand in corporate America for principled leadership under pressure. When faced with difficult decisions about discrimination, inclusion, or corporate responsibility, executives would ask themselves how Marcus Washington would handle the situation. But Marcus himself remained humble about his role in the transformation. In his final interview on the 5th anniversary of the incident, he reflected on the lessons that had emerged from that October afternoon. "I didn't set out to become a symbol or create a movement," Marcus said. "I just refused to accept that discrimination was inevitable or unchangeable. When Madison Cooper snapped her fingers at me, I had a choice. I could respond with anger and destruction, or I could respond with purpose and construction. I chose construction." He paused, looking out the window of his Manhattan office at the city that had watched his transformation from victim to teacher to catalyst for change. The real heroes of this story aren't the people with power who chose to use it responsibly. Marcus continued. The real heroes are people like Madison Cooper, who had the courage to admit they were wrong and do the hard work of becoming better. The real heroes are people like Derek Thompson, who chose growth over comfort. The real heroes are people like Elena Rodriguez, who documented injustice and created accountability. Marcus smiled the same genuine warmth that had marked his transformation from anger to grace in that hotel lobby 5 years earlier. Change is always possible, he concluded. But it requires people who are willing to do the uncomfortable work of looking at themselves honestly, acknowledging their failures, and committing to growth. The Grande Royale incident proved that even the most entrenched bias can be overcome when people choose education over ignorance, understanding over hatred, and hope over despair. And that perhaps is the most important lesson of all. In a world often divided by difference, the choice to build bridges instead of walls is always available to us. The choice to educate instead of eliminate is always an option. The choice to transform crisis into catalyst is always within our reach. All we have to do is make the choice. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. In the comments below, share a time when you witnessed or experienced discrimination. How did you respond? What would you do differently after hearing Marcus's story? Together, we're not just telling stories, we're writing the future. Because when power meets purpose, ordinary moments become extraordinary movements. This story demonstrates that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't always litigation or destruction. Sometimes it's education, accountability, and the patient work of building a better world, one transformed heart at a time.